Racist cop jailed black woman. For fun unaware, she is captain's wife and his career ends. In the quiet corridors of the Los Angeles Police Department's Central Division, an unsuspecting storm brewed the night. Officer Benjamin Ben Roberts let his ugly prejudice take the wheel. On the surface, he was just another cop on patrol, a man sworn to protect and serve. But beneath that badge, his heart simmered with hostility, looking for a target to blame for the sour turns in his life. Little did he know, his greatest mistake would come wrapped in a routine traffic stop, where he'd smugly arrest a dignified black woman for no good reason, unaware she was married to the new captain. What followed would shake the precinct to its core. Officer Benjamin Roberts had always been proud of his uniform. Every morning he stood in front of the mirror, the pristine dark blue of his LAPD attire pressed and neat, his shiny silver badge pinned over his heart. The lines etched across his forehead betrayed a man in his late 30s, worn by years on the force and marred by a personal bitterness he could not quite shake. Colleagues knew him for his cold stares and clipped answers. He was not the easygoing type. Sarcasm and skepticism came as naturally to him as breathing. Yet, if you asked him why he joined the force, he'd offer a scripted answer: to protect and serve. Dig a little deeper, and you'd find a childhood overshadowed by a father who worked for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, a man prone to bigoted remarks at the dinner table. Ben had grown up hearing jabs at minority communities, especially black neighborhoods. His father disdained the idea of coddling criminals, a phrase that loosely encompassed anyone who didn't fit his worldview. That undercurrent seeped into Ben's upbringing, shaping his perspective long before he became an officer of the law. For years, nobody questioned how Ben enforced the law on the streets. Complaints of excessive force or racial bias would trickle in, but they were often buried under paperwork. Some superiors dismissed them as standard hazards of policing in a big city. Others found Ben's arrest records impressive. He seemed to deliver more criminals to the station than anyone else. But to him, each collar was a twisted form of validation. The more people he arrested, especially people of color, the more he felt vindicated in his father's eyes. It was a cycle he couldn't break, a legacy he both loathed and clung to. Privately, Ben believed himself to be a man who upheld justice, but the badge weighed on him differently each day. He had a failing marriage behind him, his wife left after complaining about his temper, and the perpetual cynicism that filled their home. He also had a few close calls on the job, which only hardened his outlook. He trusted nobody, held grudges against everyone. So on a fateful evening, when a routine patrol turned into a personal vendetta, he had no idea how severely the universe would come back to teach him about empathy, respect, and the true purpose of the badge. The evening sky was bruised with streaks of pink and purple, typical of Los Angeles sunsets. Traffic was dense, as usual, on Figueroa Street near downtown. Cars crawled under the glow of the traffic lights, anxious drivers hoping to get home. Ben was on patrol alone that night. His partner had called in sick. The radio chatter crackled intermittently with minor incidents, nothing out of the ordinary. He found himself scanning each car that passed. His eyes landed on a sleek black sedan, tinted windows rolled up. The car was not speeding nor violating any traffic laws. Yet something in him itched, an unspoken voice telling him to check it out. Maybe the tinted windows were too dark, or maybe he just wanted a reason to enforce his power. He flicked on the squad car's lights. Inside the sedan was a woman named Angela Holmes, who had just finished a long day volunteering at a local community center in South La. She was on her way to meet her husband, newly appointed LAPD Captain Marcus Holmes, for a celebratory dinner. Angela had a gentle soul, but a strong spirit, a combination that allowed her to stand up for others whenever she saw injustice. And yet, She was not the type to flaunt her social ties or her husband's position to avoid trouble. When she noticed the flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror, Angela dutifully pulled over, certain she must have missed a turn signal or something minor. She was not worried. After all, an officer would see her clean record and send her on her way. Officer Ben Roberts stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting his belt and making sure his baton and sidearm were visible. As he approached Angela's car, he tapped on the window. She obliged, rolling it down, greeting him politely. From the start, he noticed her graceful demeanor, her professional attire, smooth voice, and the calm confidence in her eyes. That very calm seemed to unnerve him. He wanted her to be intimidated, but she wasn't. "License and registration," he barked. Angela complied, handing over the documents. Ben took a long look at them, as though searching for something to pin on her. Her license was valid, registration up to date, insurance paid in full. Nothing out of order. "Where are you heading this evening?" he asked, not kindly. Angela replied matter-of-factly, "I'm heading to meet my husband for dinner." "And who might your husband be?" She considered whether to reveal her husband's rank. She felt no need for special treatment, so she merely said, "Marcus Holmes. He's an officer with the department." Ben's eyes narrowed. He only knew one Holmes in the department, and that was the newly appointed captain at Central Division. But the last thing he wanted to believe was that this poised black woman could be the captain's wife. Instead, he assumed she was talking about some low-ranking officer, and something in him flared. Why was she dropping the name, trying to sound important? He decided on the spot he wasn't going to let her off easily. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. Angela, confused but still cooperative, exited the car. Ben subjected her to a pat-down that lingered uncomfortably. She froze, outraged internally, but trying to remain calm. "What's going on, officer?" she asked with composure. "I haven't done anything wrong." Ben sneered, rummaging through her purse, rifling through her glove compartment. He was searching for anything to charge her with. Finding nothing, frustration built in his gut. He demanded she sit on the curb while he called in her license for a background check. From the curb, Angela watched in disbelief as passers-by slowed down to gawk at the scene. She felt a wave of embarrassment, but also a deep sense of indignation. This was not just a traffic stop, this was harassment. All because she was a black woman, driving a nice car, wearing nice clothes. Even as her heart pounded in her chest, she clung to her dignity. She refused to beg or yield to fear. When the dispatcher on the other end of Ben's call confirmed Angela's background was clear, no warrants, no flags, Ben's frustration only increased. He'd imagined he'd find something, anything, to justify his suspicion. With no other recourse, he lied, claiming her tinted windows were illegal, though they measured within the legal limit. He demanded she perform a field sobriety test, unwarranted, but he insisted. Angela, on the edge of her patience, complied. She passed easily, yet Ben insisted she smelled of alcohol. She pointed out she was simply wearing perfume, but he was not interested in the truth. He was fixated on spinning a narrative that would give him grounds to arrest her. He roughly pulled out his handcuffs, clicking them around her wrists before she could react. Angela's eyes widened. "You can't be serious," she protested. Ben smirked. Resisting an officer and possible DUI, he muttered with cold finality. In reality, she'd offered no resistance except verbal disagreement. Angela felt a deep chill in her gut. She was no stranger to hearing stories about racial profiling, but never did she think it would happen to her in such a blatantly fabricated way. A surge of anger overcame her. She considered telling him she was the captain's wife, but a mixture of pride and principle kept her from dropping that bombshell. If he couldn't see she was being respectful and law-abiding, would her husband's title even help? So she let herself be taken to the station in stunned disbelief, determined that once she was booked, the truth would come out. yet she dreaded the shame and discomfort of being processed like a criminal. Her husband was waiting at a fancy restaurant for a celebration. She was about to show up in a holding cell, courtesy of a racist cop on a power trip. Officer Roberts reveled in his petty triumph. He drove back to the Central Division station, a knot of satisfaction forming in his chest. All he saw was another troublemaker checked off his list. He didn't see the possibility that the universe might have a lesson for him. And he certainly didn't suspect that, in less than an hour, he would regret every moment of this misguided arrest. Late evening found the lobby of the Central Division precinct humming with low chatter. A few officers milled around, finishing paperwork or grabbing a quick coffee. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glare on the beige walls. In the corner, a television broadcast a segment on local news channel ABC7, reporting on a rising tide of community protests against police brutality. Ben strutted in, guiding Angela by her elbow, ignoring her composed expression. He walked her straight to the booking counter, where a young desk officer, Officer Maria Delgado, looked up from her forms. "Another arrest tonight, Roberts?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's the charge?" "Possible DUI and resisting arrest," Ben said curtly, shoving a file across the counter. Angela said nothing at first. She kept her gaze steady, trying to stay calm. Maria took a closer look at Angela, noticing her dignified posture and the absence of any slurred speech or smell of alcohol. Maria's instincts pinged. Something was off. Do we have a breathalyzer test result?" she asked, flipping through the file. Ben cut in. "We'll do it here." She refused on the scene. Angela, bristling, spoke up. "I never refused. You never even asked me to blow into a breathalyzer." Maria pursed her lips. "Let's do this properly." She retrieved the breathalyzer kit. Angela complied without hesitation. The result came out 0. Maria stared at the device, then at Ben. Ben's mouth twitched, but he quickly scrawled something on a form. She might have been resisting. Could be something else. "Let's just keep her in the holding cell until we straighten this out." Angela's expression revealed a quiet fury. Yet she had no intention of causing a scene. She was not interested in drama. She just wanted justice and her phone call. But first, they took her through the humiliating process, fingerprinting, photographing, personal belongings confiscated. She felt like she had stepped into a twisted parallel universe. Maria, somewhat sympathetic, allowed Angela one phone call. Angela dialed her husband's number. It rang and eventually went to voicemail. She left a brief message. "Marcus, it's me. I'm at Central Division. Please come." The weight of her voice said everything. Captain Marcus Holmes, freshly appointed at Central Division, was out on a celebratory dinner plan. The two had been planning to meet at a cozy spot near the Staples Center called Fleming's Prime Steakhouse and Wine Bar, a real local favorite for special occasions. When Angela didn't show up and he couldn't reach her, worry gnawed at his stomach. Then he saw he had a missed call. The moment he heard Angela's voicemail, his body tensed. Why would she be at the station? Had there been an accident? Was she hurt? He tossed cash on the table to cover the drinks, apologized to the friend who had joined them, and rushed out. Upon entering the station, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying the weight of his rank, Marcus's presence commanded the room. He cut an imposing figure, broad shoulders, a steady gaze, the posture of someone used to leadership. He walked straight to the front desk, where Officer Delgado recognized him instantly. "Captain Holmes," she said, clearly unsettled by the situation. "Your wife, she's in the holding cell." Marcus's eyes widened. "On what charges?" Delgado flipped through the paperwork, stumbling over the questionable details. Officer Roberts booked her under suspicion of DUI and resisting arrest, sir. Marcus's jaw clenched. He knew his wife well. Angela would never drive under the influence, and if there was one trait about her, it was respect for the law. He didn't wait for further explanation. He headed straight for the holding area. Ben, hearing commotion, walked in. His heart stopped when he saw the captain stride into the corridor. The two men locked eyes. Marcus's furious stare pinned Ben to the floor. It was a look that said, "What have you done?" "Officer Roberts," Marcus said icily, "release my wife immediately." For the first time that night, Ben realized the woman he'd arrested was indeed Captain Holmes's spouse. A wave of alarm coursed through him, but pride kicked in. He tried to maintain composure. "Sir, one had probable cause. She was—" "Don't say another word," Marcus interrupted, voice low but lethal. He brushed past Ben, unlocking the holding cell personally. Angela stepped out, relief washing over her face, tempered by anger and humiliation. Marcus took her hands in his, examining the red marks on her wrists from the tight handcuffs. That small detail inflamed him further, and he turned his glare back to Ben. "Officer Roberts," he said in a voice that made the entire corridor hush, "my office. Now." The captain's corner office on the second floor overlooked the bustling street below. Marcus's desk, recently cleared for his new role, had only a few files and a framed photo of Angela. But tonight, that desk felt like the stage for a confrontation that would redefine the precinct. Ben stepped inside, shoulders stiff, hands fidgeting at his sides. He was trying to figure out how to spin his story, but the tension in the room was palpable. Marcus closed the door behind them. No witnesses, but the thick walls seemed to reverberate with the electricity of his anger. "My wife," Marcus began slowly, "was handcuffed, humiliated, and charged with false allegations." "You will explain yourself." Ben swallowed hard. "Captain, she was driving with tinted windows." "I suspected the vehicle might be used for." Marcus slapped the desk with the flat of his palm, cutting him off. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen her car. The tint is within legal limits. You put her through a breathalyzer, and she passed. Yet you still locked her up." Ben's face flushed. He tried to maintain eye contact. She resisted. "She refused the test on the scene, so I brought her in." A deep scowl settled on Marcus's face. "Your false statements end now. I listened to her phone call. She told me everything." His fists clenched at his sides. He took a breath, struggling to rein in his fury. "You understand the gravity of your actions? There's a word for arrests based on fabricated charges." "Sir, if you'd let me—" "You made a terrible mistake," Marcus said, his voice quieter but seething with suppressed rage. "Do you realize who she is in this community? She volunteers at the community center, helps at-risk youth. She spent years building trust between our officers and locals, and you dare treat her like some criminal, all because you suspected something." Ben found himself wordless. He realized the precarious ledge he was on. Apologizing would mean admitting wrongdoing, but continuing to lie might push the captain to an even harsher stance. Marcus shook his head, stepping away as if to calm himself. "I want your badge and your gun on my desk. Pending an investigation, I'm placing you on immediate suspension. We'll let internal affairs sort this out, but make no mistake, you are done, Roberts." Tremors of fear and anger coursed through Ben. "Sir, one, hand them over." With mechanical obedience, Ben removed his badge from his uniform and placed it next to his service weapon. Marcus scooped them up, his expression one of betrayed exasperation. "Get out," he ordered. Ben stumbled out of the office, ignoring the sympathetic or curious looks of a few officers. He felt a hot flush of shame. For the first time, the gravity of his racism and arrogance sank in. Yet anger still roiled, a defensive indignation fueling his next steps. Word spread like wildfire through the precinct. A once well-regarded or at least tolerated officer had been suspended. The fact that the new captain's wife was at the center of it added a swirl of rumors. Some officers felt schadenfreude. Ben's attitude had rubbed many the wrong way. Others worried about the political fallout. Angela, meanwhile, sat in the captain's private lounge, sipping water while Marcus spoke with her softly. Her wrists still showed faint marks from the handcuffs. She relayed every detail of the traffic stop. He listened, seething quietly. But as the adrenaline wore off, she felt drained. "Marcus," she said, placing a hand over his, "I don't want you doing something rash. You know how important leadership is, and I don't want you to sabotage your own position because of me." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "You're my wife, my partner in life. I can't let something like this slide, especially if he's doing this to other people who aren't lucky enough to have a captain for a husband." Angela nodded. "I agree. But let the process be fair. That's what we stand for. We need an official investigation. If Officer Roberts is systematically profiling black people, it has to come to light." He gave a small nod of agreement. "You're right." Quietly, they left the station that night, both of them shaken. Marcus filed an official complaint with Internal Affairs first thing in the morning, and Angela, though she craved peace, found herself at the center of a storm that was about to rage through the LAPD. Ben, suspended and seething, retreated to his modest one-bedroom apartment in East La. The place was cluttered with half-packed boxes from a recent attempt to move. The stale air reeked of old fast food wrappers and unwashed laundry. With no wife or roommate to keep him in check, Ben's surroundings mirrored his inner turmoil, disordered and neglected. He paced the living room, phone in hand, considering whom to call. He had a few friends on the force, older officers who viewed the city's changing dynamics with cynicism. Eventually he dialed Officer Patrick "Pat" Healy, a long-time buddy from the academy, someone who had also shown a propensity for rough policing methods. "Pat, you won't believe what happened," Ben began, unloading his story. "He twisted the facts to his favor. He painted himself as the victim, an officer who was only doing his job. He left out the details of the manufactured charges. Pat, however, had already heard rumors. "You sure that's how it went, man?" he pressed skeptically. Ben bristled. "I had cause." She was suspicious. "I did everything by the book. Word is, she's squeaky clean, and she's the captain's wife." "This doesn't look good," Pat said. "Then help me make it look better," Ben insisted. A long silence came from the other end. "All right," Pat finally said. "Let's meet up." They arranged to meet at a small bar near Boyle Heights. Over a few beers, Ben tried to rally Pat's support, claiming he was being scapegoated by a new captain looking to make a statement. Though Pat was no saint, he recognized the precarious nature of the situation. "If you faked those charges, it'll come out," he warned. "It won't," Ben snapped. "I just need to prove she was acting belligerent. Maybe I can find some body cam footage that supports my story." Pat shrugged uncomfortably. "Better be careful. Internal Affairs might already have it." Ben's stomach knotted. The mention of bodycam footage rattled him. He realized he'd never switched on his camera until halfway through the encounter. The part where he forced her to sit on the curb, the humiliating frisk, none of that was recorded. But the law required him to turn on the camera at the start of the stop. That was a violation in itself. When the meeting ended, Pat left, unconvinced. Ben stayed behind, downing more drinks, stewing in his own self-pity. His gut told him the walls were closing in, but pride wouldn't let him admit defeat or wrongdoing. And so he hatched a plan to manipulate whatever evidence he could, unaware that in doing so, he would unravel even larger secrets lurking within the precinct. The next morning, a crisp Monday, Lieutenant Karen Tanaka, head of Internal Affairs for the LAPD Central Division, received the captain's complaint. She was known for her meticulous, no-nonsense approach. She had a small team under her command, including Investigator Brian Nash, a methodical and quietly relentless officer with a reputation for rooting out departmental misconduct. Together, they began by reviewing bodycam footage from all the patrol officers who worked near Ben's route that night. They cross-referenced the timestamps with dispatch calls, found the exact moment Ben radioed in the traffic stop. As they combed through the digital logs, they noticed something peculiar. Ben's bodycam was switched on several minutes after the time he reported making contact with Angela. "They're supposed to turn it on as soon as a stop is initiated," Tanaka said, eyebrows knitting together. "Why the delay?" Brian Nash tapped at the keyboard. Maybe he forgot he's had warnings for late camera activation before, but let's see what's recorded once it's on. They watched the footage. The audio came through stilted at first, picking up mid-conversation. Angela sounded calm, explaining she had not been drinking. In the background, Ben's tone was forceful, borderline hostile. "Not exactly resisting," Nash observed. Tanaka nodded grimly. "We need to find out if there's more. Check the dashcam from his patrol car. See if it captures the curb scene." They pulled up the dashcam footage from Ben's cruiser. The angle revealed part of the sidewalk. They observed Angela stepping out of the car, no sign of swaying or stumbling. She seemed cooperative. Then the camera angle shifted as Ben moved the car slightly, obscuring the rest of the encounter. "It looks like he deliberately moved the car to avoid capturing the rest of the scene," Tanaka said, frustration in her voice. The initial pieces of evidence already hinted that Ben's story was shaky at best, fabricated at worst. But Tanaka wanted a thorough investigation. She and Nash compiled a list of potential witnesses, other drivers, passers-by, even local businesses with security cameras. Over the next few days, they reached out to gather statements. Meanwhile, Captain Holmes kept his distance from the internal affairs process to avoid any conflict of interest, but he provided them with Angela's statement, detailing her version of events. She also mentioned that, at the community center, she'd encountered others who had stories of negative encounters with Ben. This was more than a single incident. It was a potential pattern of racial profiling and abuse of power, and as Tanaka dug deeper, she found a troubling number of complaints in Ben's file. Many had been dismissed for lack of evidence. But now, with the captain's wife as a high-profile victim, the tide was turning. Ben's suspension meant he had time on his hands, time to brood, and time to fear. He paced his apartment endlessly, phone calls to old allies going unanswered. Even the union rep sounded wary, suggesting that if any wrongdoing was found, the union couldn't protect him. Late one night, he decided to sneak into the precinct. He still had an old keycard that hadn't been deactivated. Slipping in, he moved through the dimly lit hallways toward the evidence room where digital files were stored, hoping to find the raw footage of his bodycam or any other records he could alter or destroy. He managed to slip past a half-asleep night shift officer who recognized him but didn't think much of it. Ben was not yet officially fired, after all. Once he was in the restricted area, he booted up a workstation and tried accessing the files. But an error message popped up. Access denied. Internal affairs had locked them. Desperation prickled at his skin. He realized he was in over his head. Footsteps in the corridor made him freeze. He quickly logged off and hid in a shadow until the footsteps passed. Heart pounding, he left the precinct the way he came, cursing under his breath. The next day, Tanaka was reviewing security logs and discovered an unauthorized attempt to access the footage. She traced it to Ben's old keycard. This revelation increased her suspicion that he was trying to tamper with evidence. She filed a note that any further attempts would lead to immediate arrest for obstruction. As the days wore on, the swirl of rumors transformed into a wave of condemnation. The local news stations caught wind of the story, ABC's and CBS2, and even national outlets like CNN began sniffing around, intrigued by a case of possible racial profiling involving a captain's wife. Protesters gathered outside the precinct with signs demanding accountability. Marcus, trying to maintain professional decorum, participated in a press briefing, stating, "We are fully cooperating with an internal affairs investigation. We will not tolerate any form of discrimination or misconduct within our ranks." He carefully avoided any personal commentary, but the tension was evident. Angela, though still shaken, channeled her energy into positive action. She invited Tanaka's team to come to the community center where she volunteered. There, they met a dozen people who reported similar encounters with Ben Roberts' unjust stops, verbal abuse, insinuations of criminal activity based solely on race. One elderly man recounted how Ben pulled him over for a broken taillight, then made him sit on the curb for an hour, calling him names. A teenage girl detailed how Ben threatened to arrest her for jaywalking while walking home from school. None of these complaints had gone anywhere because they never felt safe lodging them formally. Tanaka and Nash took copious notes, recording interviews. The pattern was clear. Ben was a serial profiler, protected by a system that often swept minor complaints under the rug. But now, with the captain's wife involved, the entire department was forced to confront a deeper cultural problem. Angela felt torn. She never wanted to be the face of a scandal that could tarnish good officers' reputations. But she also knew the only way for change was to bring hidden truths to light. She supported these individuals, ensuring their voices were heard, while also preparing herself for the emotional toll the upcoming legal and administrative processes would take. Weeks of investigation culminated in a mountain of evidence against Ben. Internal Affairs recommended his immediate termination and referred the case to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office for possible criminal charges, including falsifying police reports and wrongful arrest. When Ben received notice of the charges, he felt his world crashing. He hired an attorney, a hard-nosed, high-priced defender named Travis Blythe, who was known for representing officers accused of brutality. Blythe advised him to plead not guilty, to paint Angela as the aggressor, or to argue a misunderstood situation. But the evidence was too damning. The body cam timestamps, the dash cam partial footage, and testimonies from the community center formed a tapestry of misconduct. In a final blow, a forensic analysis of Ben's patrol car logs showed multiple instances where he deviated from assigned routes to conduct random stops in predominantly black neighborhoods. Blythe's face paled when he saw the data. Still, the attorney tried a last-ditch attempt. He suggested that Angela's status as the captain's wife created a conflict of interest, making the entire process biased. But the district attorney's office, under public pressure, refused to drop the case. The Los Angeles Superior Court building on Hill Street became the stage for the trial that caught media attention. Spectators packed the courtroom, community activists, curious citizens, fellow officers, and press cameras lined up outside for daily updates. Ben sat at the defense table, suit and tie, hair neatly combed, his expression grave. Captain Marcus Holmes, also in uniform, sat in the gallery beside Angela. She offered her testimony calmly, recounting every detail of that night. The prosecution then paraded a series of witnesses, the elderly man, the teenage girl, and others who had come forward. Each story was disturbingly similar. Ben's defense tried to poke holes in their credibility, but the uniformity of the accounts was powerful. The argument that all these people independently concocted identical stories of racial profiling didn't hold water. Blythe shifted strategies, claiming Ben suffered from job-related stress leading to errors in judgment. But the judge, a stern, middle-aged woman named Judge Rebecca Morales, seemed unswayed. Marcus was not called to testify directly, to maintain the perception of neutrality, but his presence loomed large. The media used every opportunity to capture shots of him and Angela, painting a narrative of a heroic captain standing by his wife against a racist officer. For Ben, each passing day in court was like a slow-motion free fall. He saw his father's face in his mind's eye, recalling the bigoted remarks that shaped him. He felt anger at his father, anger at the system, anger at himself. But it was too late for regrets. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. Public sentiment was heavily against Ben, but the question remained, would the jury convict him on criminal charges of falsifying a police report and wrongful imprisonment? In a tense courtroom, the verdict was read, guilty on both counts. A hush fell, followed by murmurs. Ben's face went white. He turned to look at Blythe, who stared at the floor. Angela watched from the gallery, feeling a swirl of relief, sadness, and vindication. Marcus placed a steady hand over hers. The judge sentenced Ben to a year in county jail, followed by probation. It was a strong message from the court that such behavior would not be tolerated. Additionally, the judge recommended counseling and sensitivity training as part of his probation terms. In the days following, the Los Angeles Police Department announced a review of all prior complaints against Ben and other officers with similar allegations. Captain Holmes, though personally involved, advocated for deeper reforms within the precinct, better cultural sensitivity training, stricter oversight, and an improved system to handle citizen complaints. Life didn't get easier for Ben once he entered county jail. There, he found himself among some of the very individuals he had targeted over the years. Word spread quickly about the former cop-turned-inmate. The atmosphere was hostile, and guards paid him little sympathy. The cafeteria lines, the communal showers, the cramped cell, a harsh reality he never imagined for himself. The first few weeks were a nightmare of fear and paranoia. He constantly watched his back, struggling to process the irony of being locked in the same system he had abused. Visits from family were scarce. His father passed away years ago, leaving behind only a twisted legacy. His mother lived out of state and spoke to him briefly on the phone, disappointment heavy in her voice. Pat Healy visited once, out of a sense of obligation, but the conversation was stilted. Pat didn't condone Ben's actions. It was more a courtesy than friendship at that point. In moments of solitude, Ben's mind replayed that traffic stop again and again. He realized that if he'd simply acted professionally, none of this would have happened. He thought of Angela Holmes, her calm dignity, the injustice he inflicted. Regret coiled around his heart. Angela took time to heal. The emotional trauma of a wrongful arrest weighed on her, but she channeled it into advocacy. She joined forces with local civil rights groups, organizing workshops on knowing your rights during police encounters. She stood alongside her husband at community meetings, bridging gaps between residents and law enforcement. Under Captain Holmes's leadership, a renewed emphasis on accountability blossomed in Central Division. Officers underwent additional training sessions on de-escalation, cultural competence, and unbiased policing. The press continued to track Angela's story, framing her as an activist who used her personal experience to champion systemic change. Despite the media attention, she remained humble, reiterating that this fight wasn't about one cop, it was about ensuring no one else suffered as she did. Captain Marcus Holmes felt the weight of his responsibilities. Though personally vindicated, he recognized his department had serious issues. He spearheaded new policies. 1. Transparent complaint process. Citizens could now file complaints anonymously, and each complaint would be logged in a public database accessible to the community. 2. Community Ride Along program. Civilians, especially from marginalized neighborhoods, were invited to ride along with patrol officers to foster mutual understanding. 3. Regular audits, bodycam and dashcam recordings were randomly audited by an independent civilian oversight panel to discourage tampering. These changes drew both praise and criticism. Some officers felt micromanaged, but Marcus remained firm. "We serve the people," he reminded them. "We owe them transparency and respect." Months passed. Ben had served his time in county jail and was out on probation. A shell of his former self, he wandered the streets aimlessly, struggling to find employment. His criminal record, combined with his notorious case, made him almost unemployable in law enforcement or security work. One day, in a twist of fate, Angela crossed paths with him. She was walking down a sidewalk after a community meeting. He emerged from a convenience store, looking gaunt, eyes hollow. Their gazes locked. For a moment, neither knew what to say. "Miss S. Holmes," he croaked, as if tasting words he wasn't sure how to form. Angela's heart fluttered with a mix of pity and residual anger. She stood her ground. "Officer Roberts Ben," she finally said, acknowledging the change in his status. He hunched his shoulders. He struggled to speak. Perhaps he wanted to apologize, but the shame was too great. Angela, ever gracious, did not lash out. Instead, she simply nodded. "I hope you find a better path," she said, softly, then walked away. He watched her go, tears burning his eyes. Hard karma had indeed found him, and now the only path left was redemption or endless regret. Within the LAPD Central Division, the atmosphere shifted. Officers who had once turned a blind eye to subtle racism began to question their own assumptions. Some who shared Ben's sentiments either adapted to the new culture or found themselves leaving the force. Captain Holmes oversaw the department's transformation with Angela at his side. Community trust in the precinct grew incrementally, thanks to ongoing dialogue and tangible policy reforms. They still faced challenges, crime didn't vanish, and tension still flared in tough neighborhoods. But the new blueprint for policing held promise. In the following year, the number of civilian complaints decreased, and the data indicated a drop in racially biased stops. Local media reported these developments positively, noting that the Holmes era might serve as a model for other precincts. Los Angeles is a city of reinvention where people chase dreams and face harsh realities. Under the bright sunshine and palm trees, hidden ugliness can flourish if left unchecked. Yet, the city also offers hope for redemption and justice. Angela Holmes became a liaison between the police department and local communities, sharing her story to foster conversation and empathy. She organized monthly forums, inviting police officers, community members, and even those who had once run afoul of the law. They spoke about bridging divides and addressing systemic issues. When asked why she remained so dedicated, Angela smiled. "Because it happened to me, and it can happen to anyone. But if we work together, we can prevent it." Marcus, juggling administrative duties, leaned on Angela's community connections for insights. He realized that effective policing wasn't just about arrests, it was about building relationships and trust. Ben's life, post-jail, spiraled into a haze of odd jobs and fleeting apartments. Pride kept him from reaching out for help, and guilt shadowed him like a specter. He avoided old friends, especially those still in the force, unwilling to confront their judgment. He was once recognized by a local journalist who followed up on the story. Cornered outside a run-down apartment complex, Ben muttered a few words of regret, but largely avoided the camera. The interview never aired, as it lacked the sensational closure the journalist hoped for. Occasionally, Ben toyed with the idea of leaving LA for a fresh start, but he had no resources, no direction. Instead, he drifted from day to day, haunted by the knowledge that he had orchestrated his own downfall and that he had paid a steep price for indulging in racism and abuse of power. One evening, after a particularly successful community event, Angela found herself alone in the precinct's quiet hallway. She paused in front of the same holding cell where she had once been unjustly locked up. The memory was vivid, the cold bench, the sterile walls, the humiliation. Now, in that silence, she could almost feel the echoes of the past swirling around her. But rather than bitterness, she felt a sense of responsibility. She had the power to change the system from within. Marcus approached, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" She nodded, a small tear glistening in her eye. "Just remembering," she murmured. He wrapped an arm around her. "I promise we'll keep pushing for a better department and a better city." She leaned into him, grateful. "I know," she whispered, "and I believe you." In the months that followed, the feverish media spotlight surrounding Ben Roberts' trial gradually cooled, making room for other headlines. Nevertheless, the reforms sparked by Angela's ordeal continued to echo through the corridors of power and the streets of Los Angeles. The Central Division Station, once the site of a scandal that rattled public confidence, now became a model for transparent policing. Captain Marcus Holmes, alongside newly appointed advisory committees, oversaw the implementation of extensive cultural sensitivity and de-escalation training for every officer. The required modules delved into the history of policing in minority communities, inviting specialists from local universities and civil rights organizations to speak to recruits. Bodycam and dashcam footage audits became more rigorous, with random spot checks by an external review board to keep officers accountable. Angela, while maintaining her role at the community center, found herself increasingly in demand. She became a sought-after speaker at town halls, college seminars, and non-profit fundraisers. Her personal story, how a wrongful arrest opened the gates to systemic change, resonated deeply with people from various backgrounds. They saw in her not just a victim, but a catalyst for progress. She joined the boards of two major non-profits, one focused on youth mentorship, another on social justice, where her compassionate yet firm leadership style attracted donors and volunteers alike. The local government began to take notice of the positive shifts emerging from Central Division. Soon, a pilot program was initiated citywide, funded in part by state grants that encouraged precincts to adopt the same transparency measures. Captain Holmes championed. Monthly public forums, known as community roundtables, were organized in different neighborhoods. These were held in churches, schools, and recreational centers, ensuring the dialogue went beyond the station walls and reached people who had never before interacted with law enforcement outside of emergency situations. Marcus and Angela made careful efforts to balance their public roles with their private life. Their marriage, tested by Ben Roberts' misconduct, emerged stronger but also more visible to the public eye. At home, over quiet dinners, they discussed the complexities of policing an immense city like Los Angeles, where socio-economic disparities and racial tensions persist despite the best intentions. They leaned on each other for support, acutely aware that every policy meeting or community event came with heightened scrutiny. Within the department, not everyone welcomed the changes. Some veteran officers resisted the new directives, complaining about additional paperwork and the increased supervision. Yet, slowly but surely, a noticeable transformation began to take root. Younger officers, many of whom joined the force to build community relationships, embraced the training, seeing it as a blueprint for the modern, community-oriented policing they had long envisioned. Veterans, once wary of civilian oversight, found that respectful engagement with the public actually decreased confrontation and made their patrols safer. Political leaders, too, climbed on board. City council members who had initially withheld judgment applauded the drop in complaints and the rising confidence in local precincts. They funneled more resources toward mental health support for officers, recognizing that stress and burnout could compound the problems Angela faced. Meanwhile, state legislators cited Central Division's reforms as a potential framework for agencies elsewhere in California. Angela's personal advocacy also extended beyond the city limits. She was invited to Sacramento to provide testimony on a proposed bill to standardize bodycam use throughout the state. Standing before lawmakers, she recounted her experience in crisp detail, emphasizing that swift, impartial accountability was vital, not just for civilians, but for honest officers who suffered when departmental trust broke down. Her calm conviction and collaborative spirit helped garner bipartisan support for the bill, moving it closer to passage. Back in Los Angeles, neighborhood organizers praised Angela's dedication, recalling how she once volunteered quietly at a local after-school program. Now her platform was bigger, but her approach was the same, patiently hearing people's concerns, weaving them into actionable plans. As she put it in one meeting, "What happened to me was awful, but it happens to so many others who don't have a captain for a spouse. My story isn't just mine, it's a wake-up call for all of us." Encouraged by her words and the proven success of these new policies, more communities began to trust the local stations again. A sense of guarded optimism spread through areas where residents had once seen patrol cars only with apprehension. While gang violence and other crimes didn't vanish overnight, the environment improved enough that officers and civilians felt a growing mutual respect. Families noticed that officers walked their neighborhoods in pairs, talking to kids rather than merely driving by. Graffiti condemning the LAPD became less frequent, replaced by murals celebrating community heroes, some in uniform, some in everyday clothes. Over time, journalists returned to check up on Central Division's progress, finding that despite continued challenges, meaningful steps had been taken. Compared to a year ago, reports of racially biased stops dropped by a notable percentage, and the departmental complaint process seemed more accessible. These changes, though still in their infancy, were not just cosmetic. They reflected a deeper shift in philosophy, seeded by Angela's resilience and watered by the determination of Captain Holmes and a supportive coalition of activists, officers, and city officials. No one pretended the work was finished, or that prejudice had been banished for good. But for once, it seemed that a community's pain had sparked genuine momentum. In the everyday bustle of the city, beneath the swaying palm trees and the neon lights, Los Angeles was proving that it could reform from within, one precinct at a time. And while nothing could erase the harm Angela endured, her voice became a clarion call, reminding everyone that accountability and empathy can slowly steer even the largest institutions toward the values they profess. And so, La moved on, not by burying the past, but by learning from it. With each step toward transparency, respect, and understanding, the city edged closer to living up to its ideals. Angela and Marcus stood at the forefront of that effort, quietly hopeful that one day, stories like theirs would be the exception rather than the rule. From a routine traffic stop born of prejudice to a game-changing victory for accountability and reform, Angela Holmes's story shows that even in our darkest moments, truth can light a path forward. By standing up to false charges, she not only regained her freedom, but also sparked monumental changes in the Los Angeles Police Department. Once an officer consumed by racism and abuse of power, Ben Roberts faced hard karma, his career and reputation shattered. Meanwhile, Captain Marcus Holmes led a wave of meaningful reforms that rebuilt trust between law enforcement and the community. If this story moved you, if Angela's courage, Marcus's leadership, and Ben's downfall strike a chord, please show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your engagement helps spread these powerful lessons, reminding us all that justice, respect, and understanding can indeed triumph in the face of injustice. Thank you for watching.